Oppenheimer. Luke, I thought you weren't gonna do any more Just Saw It in Theater reviews. You think you're Gene Siskel? You think you're Roger Ebert? You think you're Mark Commode? Talking about a Nolan movie. Oh, so creative. Yeah, I want to talk about it. After a solid month of bombs, Christopher Nolan and Greta Gerwig take their big, giant Hollywood dingle hopper and just smack it on the table. Who'd have thought that a historical biopic and a movie about Barbie would resurrect the 2023 blockbuster selection? So, my history with Nolan goes back way before I started to watch films as a hobby. Batman Begins was probably the first film of his that I watched. I watched it on an old CRT TV, which is weird because I'm not that old, it's just what was there. It was upstairs at my grandparents' house and I couldn't tell you a damn thing that happened in it. Since then I've watched it a good 3 or 4 times and really liked it. And some years later I watched The Dark Knight and loved it. I love both Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Then when I decided that I really liked watching movies, I made a list of prominent directors that I should be aware of. This includes people like Kubrick, Tarantino, Scorsese, and of course Christopher Nolan. I went through his films one by one and accidentally skipping Dunkirk. I know, whoopsie. And now seeing Oppenheimer, I have a chance to reevaluate Nolan as a filmmaker. And that's always exciting, especially after Tenet, which I'm not a fan of. Back when it came out, I was a defender of it, but watching it again, it kind of feels like Nolan grabbing his dick and shoving it in your face.
Nobody's dick's that long. Not even Long Dick Johnson, and he had a fucking long dick. Thus the name.
A lot of prominent directors have those films for some reason. I have this preface because I want you to understand my mindset going into the theater to watch this movie. And after watching it, I thought it was pretty good. It's not the best, and I don't think it's my favorite. For me, that title is a tie between Memento and The Prestige, but I guess if you forced me to pick one, I'd probably pick Memento. The concept and the script were just so interesting to watch on screen. You could tell that Chris and John were passionate about the story and how they could tell it, which led to a near perfect film in my opinion.
And my solution to telling the story subjectively was to deny the audience the same information that the protagonist is denied. And my approach to doing that was to effectively tell the story backwards.
It feels like a Nolan movie without the explosions and the wide IMAX shots and planes crashing into buildings. And anyway, I'm talking about Memento, and this video is about Oppenheimer. If you didn't know, this film is about the start of the Manhattan Project, a project started by the US government to develop a weapon to end the war in Europe. The government gathered the best theoretical physicists from around the country to develop a new weapon. The Manhattan Project was led by one J. Robert Oppenheimer, who assembled a team to create the bomb. The main conflict of the film isn't the bomb creation itself, although that is a big part of it. I'd argue the biggest conflict is the aftermath of the event, or fallout, if you will. The film itself is structured into a few sections. In the first act, we have the introduction to Oppenheimer himself, his past, and how he became a professor at Berkeley. The second act is the war and the development of the bomb. And the last act is the hearing and the post-war drama that took place. I want to start with the things that I didn't like first, so we can end positively. I mentioned Nolan's passion when making Memento, and the passion seems to be there for Oppenheimer as well. But at first it puzzled me why Nolan would tackle someone like Oppenheimer in the first place. Honestly, if you asked me 5 years ago who I would pick to make a movie about him, I'd probably guess somebody like Paul Thomas Anderson. His style seems to really complement character studies and biographical films. He could do some crazy stuff too. You can't forget about Boogie Nights or The Master when you think of PTA, but you get what I mean, right? I know this sounds kind of weird, but this is where my mind went. But Nolan quickly flashed his personal style, and I started to understand where he was going with it. Yeah, he was going for a historical approach, but he did so with expressive imagery and distinct shots. Think of it this way, what if Christopher Nolan had made Schindler's List? Hold on a second.
Hold on a second.
In this theoretical situation, he had all the background knowledge and cultural heritage of Steven Spielberg. This is what it would feel like. By no means am I saying that Oppenheimer and Schindler's List are similar movies. They're not. All I'm saying is that if Nolan had made Schindler's List, this is how he would have approached it, in his own unique style. I cannot stress enough how much Nolan's fingerprints are all over this movie. I don't mean that in a bad way overall, but there are some things about Nolan that were a bit annoying and obvious, even in this movie. Not all of the time, but some of the time during the run of the movie, there will be these weird insert shots of like explosions or particles zooming around. It doesn't disrupt the flow. It does get a little bit annoying. Here, I'll give you a taste of what these scenes looked like. Hey, Oppenheimer, are you still working on the bomb? Oh, hey, General Groves. Yes, I am still working on the bomb. The biggest thing is the use of music in the background. We're watching the first act of the film and the music almost makes you think you're watching the rising action or the climax or something like that. It gets kind of grating after a while, and when you do get to a scene where the music does cut out, you're immediately pulled back into the movie way more than you were before. I think of the scene at the table that takes place during the height of the Manhattan Project's development, or maybe even the actual Trinity test. These two scenes were so masterfully shot, and the lack of sound really makes those scenes pop. The weakest part of the film is the first act. I gotta say, I didn't really care a whole lot for Oppenheimer's past, and while it was still interesting, that combined with the fast editing and the weird love lives of the characters, it didn't really pull me in like the rest of the film did. Florence Pugh is an amazing actress, but I didn't really understand her character all that much. I get she's historically significant, but I don't know, it didn't make sense to me. That being said, I never left to go to the bathroom or anything, and to its credit, these scenes did end up meaning things in the grand scheme of the story. It was just weird timing and editing. There are points where the movie lost me. Like maybe for a split second I forgot what the point of the movie was, but I was immediately sucked back in because someone would mention the war or atomic particles or something, and I'd be like, oh okay, we're back. Oh yeah, the bomb. Yeah, I know what that is. Now that I've said that, I want to get to the things that I really liked about the film, and there's quite a bit of it. First of all, I think the acting was nearly immaculate. I said before that I didn't get Florence Pugh's character, but she was fantastic acting-wise. I say nearly immaculate because there's one glaring line in my head that makes me cringe every time I hear it, even in the trailers before it was even released.
How about because this is the most important thing to ever happen in the history of the world?
Matt Damon can't even make that sound good. When we actually get to the scenes in Los Alamos, when we actually get to the scenes in Los Alamos and the construction of the Trinity test, I was all in. The film really does a great job building and then releasing the stress and anxiety that Oppenheimer feels throughout the section of the movie. The Trinity test scene is both a huge relief and a great introduction to the next section of the film. It really is the most straightforward part of the movie, and I kind of wish the rest of the film was like this. Not that the first and third acts are bad, far from it. It was just this part was so good it almost brings down the other parts. On the whole, I think a lot of people will complain about the editing. I did too for a little bit, and I understand why. It can be a bit confusing, switching between the different points throughout Oppenheimer's life. Hell, it confused me at points too. But on the whole, I was able to follow it pretty well. This may be because the movie is the exact topic of history that interests me. I'm one of those guys who will sit and talk your ear off about the Second World War and the history surrounding it, but for someone who isn't interested in this stuff, it may be kind of boring. But for me, it was exactly what I wanted to see when expecting a movie about fucking J. Robert Oppenheimer. The ending feels like the ending to Inception, with the same sort of escalating musical score and the flashing between different moments in time. Not in the sense of the plot, these are completely separate films plot-wise, but it feels the same dramatically speaking, and while I don't love similar endings in films, the ending to Inception is one of the best endings in cinema history, so I can give it some slack, and this one is fantastic as well. I had a really good time watching this movie, and I will try to watch it again at some point. 3 hours is a bit much. I guess I'm gonna have to get used to filmmakers making these films with these runtimes, because it doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon for some reason. Now that I say that, I should check the runtime of Martin Scorsese's film coming out at— Jesus fucking Christ! Well, I hope you enjoyed my second video in a row about a movie that recently came out in theaters. The next video is not going to be that. In fact, my next video might be a little bit more unorthodox.